Hey y'all, we're going to talk about the First Great Awakening. So last time we talked about the Enlightenment, and so we talked about how there was a shift in the 1600s and 1700s about how Western Europeans, colonists in the New World, began to think about how we know knowledge. If you remember Benjamin Franklin, I talked about Thomas Jefferson will be good examples of this. They began to criticize certain aspects of Christianity that they saw as contrary to the rational way that the world works. So, they might accept that there was a creator God of some sort, but that there wasn't this ongoing intervention, perhaps, that God creates the laws of nature, and that's what defines daily life, that's what defines the cosmos, and that God doesn't violate those laws of nature necessarily. This is going to create some more rational forms of Christianity. A really famous example of this is the Jeffersonian Bible. So Thomas Jefferson, who we're going to really get into a little bit later, is at one point going to go through the New Testament, and he's essentially going to, based off the idea that supernatural things don't happen, he's going to cut out anything in the narratives of the Gospels of Jesus's life as portrayed in the Bible, where he's going to say anything that is supernatural, raising dead, healing sick, he's going to cut those things out. And what's left is essentially the moral teachings of Jesus Christ. And that's a really good example of Enlightenment influence on, remember, deistic ways of thinking. By the early to mid 1700s, we begin to see a backlash against this Enlightenment influence on colonial thinking. So historians talk about this Great Awakening that happens in the 1700s in the colonies. And what they're essentially talking about is a series of Christian revivals that begins to happen. And a lot of this is a call back to a more traditional way of understanding Christianity. So there are some major figures that begin to emerge in the 1700s that will be able to push this movement away from a secularization or a more focus on deism and back to traditional forms of Christianity. One of the really clear examples of this is George Whitefield. George Whitefield is this person who becomes wildly successful in the 1700s, leading these revivals throughout the colonies, the English colonies. So Whitefield is a charismatic person. He's trained as an actor. He's a true believer, and so he uses kind of this rhetorical skill that he has, and he becomes a very famous evangelist, or somebody who's going through the colonies, preaching in fields, and he begins to gather thousands of people around him, and they begin to have a return to more traditional forms of Christianity. Another good example is John Wesley. John Wesley is an English Anglican minister who begins to focus on holy living. He's going to kind of reject some certain aspects of predestination in Calvinism, and he's going to focus on people being able to choose to come to repentance and belief in Christianity. And he's going to be the founder of Methodism. So if you see the Methodist Church, this goes back to John Wesley. And then we have our central figure here that we're reading this week, Jonathan Edwards. And Jonathan Edwards is revered as one of the most pivotal thinkers of colonial America. He is early on, ends up going to Yale at like 14 years old, just extremely bright, very rigorous thinker, respected across the board. He's eventually going to become president of Princeton University before he dies very early. But what Jonathan Edwards is going to do is really focus on these more traditional ways of understanding Jesus, Christianity, the role of religion in society. Like the prescript that we read this week in Sinners of the Hands of an Angry God, Jonathan Edwards might not be the most famous of the evangelists or preachers speaking in the Great Awakening, but he is the theologian. He begins to write very articulately about what it means to have this revival or this calling back to more traditional Calvinist forms of Christianity. And so I want you to really focus on the pictorial depictions that's going to come out of this portrayal that Jonathan Edwards is preaching. He's essentially saying that every person, you might think that your life is going well and you're out, your business is going good, your day-to-day is going well, you're in good health, but really you are like a spider, and God holds you over the flame, and the only thing that keeps you, he's angry, he's so angry because of your sin, but the only thing that keeps you out of it, is his choice, his volition. He's very famously going to say, you contribute nothing except your own sin that makes your salvation necessary. So when we have the Great Awakening, it begins to happen, and this is sweeping all through through the colonies. This is really a pushback against this more secularization, more rational forms of deism that we've seen before. And this becomes a very pivotal turn in American culture that will begin to turn it back towards an older, more traditional forms of Christianity.